Hello Internet! Today we got a little bit more on our in-depth review of the new Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Once again, major release by Games Workshop. We're going to be taking a continued in-depth look at this game. We've got some battle reports coming out. We've got one hobby tutorial already on how to assemble. We've got a smaller one on how to prime, but most people know how to do that. If not, just watch it. It's a pretty simple, straightforward process. We'll be doing some painting stuff as well. But for right now, we have the main rulebook that just came out this Friday. It's big, it's colorful, it's full of art. So here's the book. Warhammer Age of Sigmar, mighty battles in an age of unending war with a Stormcast Eternal fighting a Khorne Blood Warrior, which I'm assuming that is. And I know it has blood in the name because it's dealing with Khorne. Got a lot of notes here to go ahead and through it. We got, of course, our intro, the Age of Sigmar has begun. Table of contents. Now, one thing I've noticed about the book, I know Games Workshop has been getting a lot of criticism with their Warhammer 40k codexes recently because they've taken a lot of the actual artwork out and replaced it with photographs of painted miniatures. This book is chock full of that old artwork that people love, and it looks fantastic. I mean, you take a look through the intro where they're talking about the Stormcast Eternals and the Return of Sigmar, loaded with art throughout the book. Now, right here, they kind of have a forced breakdown. This has no game mechanical effect. Best I can say is this is just the Warrior Chamber of the Hammers of Sigmar chapter of Sigmarites. Got a couple of paint schemes, more art, descriptive battles, goes into describing who Chaos is, and this is the first point I want to bring up. Storyline for the new Warhammer. Slaanesh is missing and presumed dead. The Great Horned Rat has taken a place in the Pantheon as a Chaos God. Very interesting. I don't know if they're trying to do it to make their game a little bit more appealing to the masses and take all the sadomasochism elements out. But I would not be surprised. Then we get a treatment for Chaos, and now we have the Age of Sigmar area. Moving on, more storyline. Next one I want to point out is the Lost Ages. This is when we get to an area on the background of what's been going on between the Warhammer Old World, of which I was a fan, and the new Age of Sigmar with the 8 mortal realms and the Realm of Chaos. Now they go and talk about various things. This one I wanted to point out just because it's a really, really badass looking piece of art. I think that's the new Grimnir, best I can say. He's basically the god of the Realm of Fire now. And he is no longer a dishonored dwarf, but now the Fire Slayers, with a Y, because that could be copywritten, they're now mercenaries who work for Urgold and other silly-sounding things. A lot of stuff on orcs, a lot of stuff on more chaos, some stuff about Nagash. You may notice, and this is totally not the Imperial Palace from 40k, that is Azerheim, Sigmar's fortress. And Sigmar has a space station. Moving on. Yeah, you haven't noted that one. There's a lot of storyline in this. A lot of world, a lot of narrative, which personally, I really like narrative. It does seem that Games Workshop is kind of pushing Warhammer into the world of a more narrative role-playing game-like thing, rather than a competitive miniatures game. And that's kind of what it started out as. Warhammer and Warhammer 40k both were originally billed as role-playing games. Here we have what we expect from Games Workshop. Lots of pictures of beautifully painted miniatures and big battle scenes with more figures than your typical gamer is ever going to have. Some fine detail on a lot of their studio stuff. Everything on the new round bases, because base size is now completely irrelevant, and we'll get to that in a little bit. More and more painted miniatures. That guy looks new. It's a skink riding a giant dinosaur, which is awesome. When we get to the Forces of Destruction, which I've passed, we have a bunch of new giants. So we can probably expect to see a new giant box set in the near future. Ogres, lots of tree stuff, more giants, more Sigmarite stuff, yada yada yada. Lots and lots of painted miniatures in the Pageantry of War section. Now here we wind up starting to get into the nitty-gritty of actually playing this game, making your mark on the mortal realms. This is when the book starts discussing something called a battle plan. Now, from what I can tell, the new Age of Sigmar is very scenario-based. This is not a game where you set up and knock down your opponent. There is something you're fighting for in every game you play. I personally like that, but we'll get into more of that later. Then we actually have the rules. Now, I did a small unboxing of the Age of Sigmar box set with one of my companions, and these rules are photocopied. It's the exact same rules. We've done a little bit of playing around with them, and there's a couple questions and ambiguities we have. There is nothing listed in here about army composition, points, or balance in any way, shape, or form. I have concerns about this, but we'll get into those when we actually start playing the game. Then we have what is probably the bulk of the book. I think we're about halfway through. The Realm Gate Wars begin. Now, this area right here is where they start describing the part of this narrative story arc that Age of Sigmar takes place in. As it stands, the old world was destroyed. Sigmar took a bunch of the heroes and left because he could have directly intervened and saved the world, but that wouldn't have won in the war. It would have just been a battle. So he retreated, all the goodly gods retreated, and the cosmos got completely rebuilt with the dark gods controlling everything. That became the Age of Chaos. And then eventually Sigmar bided his time and just came in like a thunderstorm, literally like a thunderstorm, and started beating indoors and kicking chaos in. Move on to the Brimstone Peninsula, and this is talking about a specific campaign in the Realm of Fire when Sigmar first made his reappearance and came down with lightning bolts. More art, and it winds up going on different specific aspects of the military campaign, where we bring on to my next note. Battle plan, hold, or die. Now I'm going to go and take this off so you can see. This is what the baseline battle plan is. It has the armies, invader's objective, custodian's objective, some special abilities for them, and then it actually lists out the important parts of the table, which is really cool. Everything is spelled out for you, and it has your victory conditions, really everything you need to play the scenario, except the figures you're going to use to play this scenario. Next, we have rules for the time of war. Now, it begins with a scenario, and then it moves on to overall special rules and things you can do if you're playing a campaign in the Brimstone Peninsula specifically. It's got some cool ideas to it. I mean, if you want to get with your friends and go ahead and chuck some dice and have an afternoon or a weekend of gaming, you can do some really cool stuff with this. And it moves on to really just a whole lot more about this specific campaign, more battle plans, basically just the retaking of the Brimstone Peninsula by Sigmar's forces. Then it moves on, and there's another campaign just like that with the Greenglades, which takes place in the Realm of Life. And this is dealing with specifically the forces of Nurgle being defeated by the tree folk of what used to be the Wood Elves, but are now, I believe, called the Sylvanost or something like that. Something sounds vaguely Tolkienish, but can be copywritten, so Games Workshop doesn't get chapter housed again. And then we have another set of rules for a campaign taking place in the Greenglades. Once again, really, really cool. I would not be surprised at all if Games Workshop comes out with more books dealing with just the campaign aspect of things, and we wind up getting various campaigns dealing with all sorts of locales over all 8 of the mortal realms, as well as the realms of chaos. Now as we go on, we still get more scenarios, more description of what these scenarios are, so you can actually see what you're going to be doing. A demon named Boltherax, which, you know, sounds nerdly. More. There's another campaign in here. So overall, if you like the idea of having a narrative campaign associated with a game, there's a lot in here to like. Now we bring up my next point, Legends of War. So what is this? And this is where people are going to want to pay attention. War Scrolls. This is the way units are broken up in the new Warhammer. Every unit has a War Scroll associated with it, and these War Scrolls say everything about the unit. Now, obviously, there are no points. There are no limits on how many War Scrolls you can take. When you have these things, Lord Celestant on Dracoth, Lord Celestant, it's one model. Now, when we move on, though, Gryph-hounds. A unit of Gryph-hounds may have any number of models. A unit of prosecutors may have 3 or more models, which means you can have 50 of them in your unit if you really wanted to, which brings up to one of my real big final points about this. For the most part, you get the same war scrolls for the Sigmarites that you did in the starter set. However, you also have the Lord Castellant, Gryph-hounds, which are cute, and Judicators, which are the Stormcast Eternals with various ranged weaponry. By the looks of it, they get bows, crossbows, probably different options. And the Liberators now also have different weapon options, and it describes in here what weapon options you can give them. Like 1 in every 5 can swap out their shield with a Grand Hammer or a Grand Blade, which are fancy ways of saying great weapons. Moving on, we have our Khornate units. Chaos, all that kind of stuff. The Mighty Lord of Khorne, identical to the starter box. The Blood Secretor, with its ridiculous name, identical to the starter box. Bloodstoker, Korgoroths, Blood Warriors, Blood Reavers, Blood Takers, Skull Takers, more blood, more skulls. Then we wind up getting a little bit of information on the Sylvaneth, specifically the Woodfolk. Tree Lord Ancients, Tree Lords, Branch Rates, and Dryads. So they're adding the Wood Spirits to the game immediately, rather than anything else, which is interesting to say the least. Definitely gives this book a lot of flavor to it and does not feel watered down and generic. Now, this is interesting. The Sylvaneth Wildwood. This is a terrain feature with a war scroll that has the Sylvaneth keyword. This is part of the new Wood Elves army. Very, very interesting to actually have these specific terrain elements as part of an army that you purchase rather than just as an army. Just as scenery you put on the table. Now lastly, we have the War Scroll Battalions. We have the same Thunderstrike Brotherhood that we did in the starter box. We also have the Heroes of the Host for the Stormcast Eternals, which it's basically a bunch of characters, and the special ability just lets you thunder stomp your way through the battle. As long as everybody stays together, you just form a little brute squad that murders everything in its path. Next, we have the Goreblade Warband, exactly the same thing as in the starter box. Then we have the Sylvaneth Guardians of the Deepwood, which you have to have basically 3 Treemen, 2 units of Dryads, and 2 Sylvaneth Wildwoods. You've got to have 2 of those terrain pieces as part of the battalion, which is very interesting. That's something I'm going to want to play around with. And then it finishes it up with yet another battle scene between the followers of Khorne and the Stormcast Eternals. Now, this is a very large book. It's not as big as the other Warhammer core books have been. This one caps out at 264 pages, including art, as opposed to the 40K rulebook and the Fantasy rulebook from the last editions. Now, the new 40K one is 3 smaller rulebooks instead. It's a thinner book. It's still got the $75 price tag, so you are definitely paying for it, but the sheer volume of artwork in here and the beauty of this book makes me think it's not a bad deal. This is a pretty book. It's got a lot of really cool storyline, and while I am very sad to see the Warhammer Old World go, I am really digging the new world. It seems like a lot of fun. Very, very rules light. There's very little in the way of really rules at all. Just seems like a good way to waste an afternoon or a weekend. I do not see this as having a competitive tournament format or competitive community format at all unless they add some form of balancing factor in with points. But that's the book.